Ethan stood in the lobby of the Azure Tower, the gleaming skyscraper that pierced the clouds in downtown. It was a bustling morning, people rushing in every direction, their eyes flicking from phones to coffee cups. He took a deep breath, adjusting his tie and trying to calm the flutter in his stomach. Today was an important day, one that would change everything for him. As he stepped into the glass elevator, he glanced at the digital display. Just another typical day, or so he thought. The elevator doors began to slide shut when he noticed a woman sprinting towards him. Her eyes were wide, her hair swaying with each hurried step. Without even thinking, he hit the button to hold the door open. She exclaimed, slipping inside just as the doors finalized their closure. Ethan offered her a small smile. "No problem," he replied. Her presence eased his tension, if only for a moment. He turned to face the panel while the elevator hummed upwards, the familiar sound soothing in an oddly comforting way. "I always appreciate a little kindness," she said, glancing at him. Her voice was warm. They exchanged small talk, laughing lightly at the mundane happenings of their morning routine. But as the elevator glided upwards, the woman's phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She pulled it out, her face suddenly paling as she stared at the screen. Ethan glanced over, curiosity getting the better of him. She swallowed, eyes glued to the news alert. Her voice shook slightly. "It's about someone in..." His heart raced. She hesitated, but then read aloud. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was not just a headline for him. This was his boss, the man who had taken him under his wing just a year ago. The rapidly escalating drama felt like a punch to the gut. "Wow, that sounds serious," he managed, trying to keep his tone steady while feeling the weight of disbelief settle on his shoulders. He wanted to resist the sense of dread gnawing at him, but it seeped in nonetheless. The woman betrayed a look of helplessness as she continued. Her eyes darted up to meet his, filled with concern, implicated. His voice was quieter now, underlining the confusion and fear weaving through him. She read more from her phone. Each word hit him like a hammer, the walls of the elevator feeling narrower, suffocating. He could already picture the aftershocks, the chaos this would bring to their office. As the elevator passed the 20th floor, a loud ping interrupted their thoughts, announcing their arrival. "Hey," the woman said, clearly affected. Ethan shook his head as if to clear it. I don't even know." When the doors slid open, Ethan was hit by the whirlpool of activity in the lobby. People were crowding around the large TV mounted on the wall, eyes glued to the unfolding news story. The stark reality of the situation began sinking in. The woman asked, her voice hovering between warmth and worry as they stepped out. Ethan nodded, the need to understand what was going on pulling him forward. He fought his way through the crowd, heart racing with every step. The newscaster's voice echoed through the lobby, cutting through conversation and confusion. That felt like a slap in the face. He paused, trying to steady his breath as the words sank deeper into his gut. He allowed himself a brief flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, it would all blow over. But the expression on the faces around him told the truth. News like this didn't just vanish. His phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was a message from his colleague, Sarah. "Have you seen the news?" The urgency in her words stirred panic. "Oh God," he muttered. The news piece shifted onto clips of the CEO, William Farrow. Ethan's stomach churned as the man spoke confidently on screen, denying all allegations. It was as if he was watching a stranger instead of the mentor he had respected. William insisted, his words dripping with practiced precision, yet Ethan felt something bitter settle in his chest. Was he being genuine, or was this just another calculated response in a game far bigger than he could handle? A voice next to him snapped, jolting Ethan from his thoughts. A tall man in a tailored suit exclaimed, "This is a complete mess." People crowded closer, engaging in spirited discussions about the news. Some were angry, others were scared. Ethan felt like a spectator in a surreal nightmare. He scanned the room for familiar faces, desperate for someone to anchor him in this storm. Woman from the elevator appeared by his side again, worry etched on her brow. I didn't catch your name earlier. I'm Julia," she said, extending a hand to him. "Ethan," he replied automatically, shaking her hand in a daze. A weak smile crept on her lips, but it quickly faded as another news alert flashed on the screen. His world shattered further. Whistleblowers, the gravity of it all was too hard to comprehend. If this was true, how would it affect him, his job, his future? He felt a knot tightening in his stomach with every moment that passed. He had built so much his career, his reputation on the belief that the man he worked for was honorable. Their late-night brainstorming sessions, the laughs shared, the promises of growth he had been given, everything felt like a lie now. "You know, usually I'd avoid places like this," Julia said, her voice almost drowned out by the chaotic buzz inside the lobby. Ethan turned to her, surprised at the slight hint of levity in her tone. "You're right, I think we're all feeling something right now," she said, eyes reflecting empathy. The moment felt oddly comforting, as if the unease surrounding them had briefly lifted. As the news cycle continued, Ethan's mind raced. He recalled the conversations he had held with his boss about ethics, about integrity in business. Maybe now was the time to question everything, not just what was happening, but who he wanted to be moving forward. Suddenly, he felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Sarah, her face tight with anxiety. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of dread settle in once again. It's not good, she replied, almost whispering. People are scared. Panic flooded through Ethan like ice, and he fought to keep his composure. He asked, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. I can't say, she replied, glancing over at Julia briefly before turning back. But if things go south, that warning lingered in the air like a thunderclap, ringing ominously in his ears. They were caught in a storm that no one had prepared them for. As chaotic conversations enveloped them, Ethan felt the need to choose his own path. He looked to Julia, who stood quietly by his side. He asked, she sighed, I'm just a bystander. No, I mean, haven't you ever wanted more? She blinked, caught off guard. Her expression softened, revealing a glimmer of understanding. You know I have, we all do, right, but it's just… Ethan felt a strange connection, as if they were two ships adrift in a storm. Maybe today is the wake-up call we all need, he proposed, his voice steadying with newfound resolve. As the ominous headlines continued to roll across the screen, a thought crystallized in his mind. Amid the chaos, perhaps there was an opportunity to find not just himself, but a purpose he had yet to grasp. He turned back to the TV and watched as the newscaster spoke with earnest urgency. And as he stood there in the crowded lobby, side by side with Julia and Sarah, he understood that no matter how daunting the road ahead looked, it was a road worth traveling. The elevator doors began to close, the mechanical whir humming softly in the air. Ethan's heart raced as he realized he had forgotten his briefcase in the hallway. Just as he turned to grab it, a woman sprinted around the corner, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Without thinking, he slammed his hand against the door button, halting them. She gasped, sliding inside. A mix of relief and gratitude passed between them, and for a moment, the mundane act of holding an elevator door felt significant, important, even. He noticed her hair was disheveled, her eyes a bit wide, as if she had just stumbled into an unexpected storm. He tried to make small talk, asking about her day. Just another busy morning, she replied, breathing heavily. As the elevator began its ascent, the soft ding of the floors passed them by, one after another. The atmosphere felt different, charged with an unspoken tension that left him both curious and uneasy. Suddenly, her phone buzzed loudly, breaking the bubble of their brief companionship. She glanced down, her expression shifting from relief to disbelief in an instant. Ethan, wait until you see this, she said, scrolling through her screen. The urgency in her voice pulled him closer. He asked, the warmth of their earlier conversation now replaced by a growing knot of concern. There's a breaking news story about… She paused, her eyes locking onto his. It's about Arcadia Enterprises. His heart dropped as he leaned closer, peering at her phone. Each word felt like a hammer chipping away at the foundation of his world. Ethan stammered, dread pooling in his stomach. A wave of disbelief crashed over him. William, the man who had taken him under his wing, who had mentored him, was it possible? The news continued scrolling, a relentless barrage of accusations that felt heavier with each passing second. Julia asked, her anxiety spilling into her voice. Yeah. He felt the silence wrap around them like a thick fog. This can't be happening. The elevator chimed softly, signaling they were headed to the lobby, but to Ethan, it felt like the slow descent into chaos. As the doors opened, he could already hear voices rising in a mixture of concern and outrage, the echo of murmurs crashing against his resolve. Someone shouted from across the lobby. Ethan stepped out, a deer caught in headlights, stumbling into the vortex of emotions swirling around him. Panic, fear, anger, it was all there, mingling with disbelief. He caught sight of the large television mounted on the wall, broadcasting the story live. The newscaster's face was stern, outlining the severity of the situation. Another employee has come forward, alleging illegal activities, the voice echoed, sending chills down Ethan's spine. How could this be real? He thought back to the days spent in the office, late nights filled with brainstorming sessions, strategies, laughter. How could the man he admired, the leader he had trusted, be embroiled in such darkness? The walls of the lobby seemed to close in around him, mixing with the weight of uncertainty. Sarah, a colleague, rushed towards him, her face a mask of concern. You heard the news, right? No, it's not, he replied, still feeling disoriented. It's going to impact all of us. They're already talking about emergency meetings, Sarah pressed, her eyes flickering anxiously. The crowd huddled around the TV, eyes glazed with intense focus. People were whispering, speculating, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Ethan felt like an outsider looking in. Suddenly, the familiar faces of his colleagues felt strange, like strangers caught in a whirlwind of panic. Ethan muttered to no one in particular, frustration seeping out. Julia, who had followed him out of the elevator, stepped up, her brow furrowed with determination. We need to figure out the truth, all of this confusion. Ethan looked at her, an unexpected spark igniting their shared sense of resolve. You're right. The waves of anxiety were crashing, growing larger, but they had a choice: sit and let fate decide or take control. Ethan felt a new urgency crawl under his skin. He glanced at Julia. Do you want to go upstairs? Without hesitation, she nodded. They made their way to the stairwell, the cold metal rattling as it echoed their swift footsteps. Each step felt like a step toward clarity, a chance to uncover the truth. The world outside became a blur, and the chaos of the lobby faded behind them. As they ascended, Ethan replayed the moments in his mind: conferences, training sessions, and even the casual discussions they'd had about ethics and leadership. William's conviction seemed undeniable until now. What had he missed? Julia asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Ethan halted, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. I don't want to believe that, but everything I've seen. They emerged on their floor, the stillness contrasting sharply with the intensity below. The office was seemingly quiet, but tension hung thick in the air. Seeing familiar faces whispering and avoiding eye contact only intensified Ethan's anxiety. Let's check in with the HR department, Julia suggested. She led the way down the corridor where an office door stood slightly ajar. As they entered, the HR manager, a middle-aged woman named Carla, was hunched over her desk, furiously scrolling through her laptop. She looked up as they entered, concern etched deeply across her face. She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, we just came from downstairs, Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Carla sighed, running a hand through her hair. We're in crisis mode right now. The board will meet later today to discuss the next steps, but I can't offer much more than that. Julia frowned, crossing her arms. But what about people who might be directly affected? Carla's gaze softened, an understanding flickering in her eyes. Stay alert, keep communication open. Ethan felt a flicker of uncertainty pass over him again, the walls closing in once more. If the company fell apart, what would happen to him? What would he do? Leaving HR, Julia turned to him. Maybe we start reaching out to other colleagues. They went from desk to desk, talking to everyone they could, gathering bits of information, trying to piece together a chaotic puzzle. Most were as lost as they were, but a shared energy sparked among them. As the minutes stretched to hours, Ethan grappled with emotions that threatened to drown him. He searched for clarity in the swirling disarray, questioning his loyalty and his judgment. Eventually, they found themselves in the break room, a small corner of comfort amid the tumult. The small TV mounted on the wall was still playing the live news. Ethan's chest tightened. This wasn't just news, it was personal, cutting deeper than any headline could convey. We can't let this define us, Julia said passionately, her eyes blazing with determination. Ethan looked at her, feeling a sense of urgency swell in the room. Julia nodded, excitement dancing in her eyes. Yes, something has to change. With renewed energy, they began drafting a manifesto for their colleagues, laying out the importance of honesty and integrity within their company. It felt empowering to take steps forward, despite uncertainty hovering over them. As they gathered their ideas, the news roundup continued, morphing from facts into speculation. Ethan could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, but in that room, alongside Julia and their colleagues, that weight became a shared burden. Then a notification pinged on Ethan's phone. It was a message from William himself. I'm addressing everyone in 1 hour. The words punched him in the gut. He felt torn between loyalty to a mentor and the painful reality unraveling before him. He voiced hesitantly, glancing at Julia and the others. Then it's up to us to ensure we find out, Julia replied, her voice firm. As they gathered in the conference room, Ethan's heart pounded harder than ever. The walls felt closer as everyone assembled, murmurs buzzing with uncertainty and hope mixed in their eyes. And at that moment, as William walked into the room, all eyes turned toward him. His face was unreadable, confidence juxtaposed with an undercurrent of anxiety swirling within him. Thank you for coming, everyone, William began, his voice carrying a weight that reverberated against the walls. Ethan held his breath as the room fell silent, an electric tension crackling in the air. He had no idea what this leader was going to say next, but it was a moment they would all remember for the rest of their lives. And as William spoke, Ethan felt his own resolve stabilize. The truth was a powerful force. It had the ability to break open the most secure facades, exposing raw honesty. Whether it tore them apart or drew them together, one thing was certain: this story was just beginning. Ethan pressed the button for the ground floor, leaning against the cool metal walls of the elevator. Just another Tuesday in the Azure building, he thought. As the elevator doors began to close, he spotted her, a woman rushing towards him with a look of panic in her eyes. Without even thinking, he jutted out his arm and pressed the open button with urgency, holding the door for her. She breathed, stepping in just as the door slid shut. She was disheveled, strands of hair escaping her ponytail, and a sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead. No problem, he replied, smiling at the stranger. Her presence added a spark to the early morning monotony. As the elevator ascended, he stole glances at her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, the noise slicing through the silence. She pulled it out and froze, her face drained of color. He asked, concerned. She looked up, wide-eyed, still holding her phone as though it were a live grenade. You won't believe this. It's about. Before she could finish her sentence, the elevator dinged. They reached the lobby. Ethan's heart raced, a premonition prickling at the back of his mind. He exited, but Julia lingered behind, glued to her screen. He felt an urge to know what was happening. He called out, but she stepped through the doors, eyes still fixed on her phone, almost oblivious to him. The lobby felt more chaotic than usual. Voices buzzed, phones chimed. As Ethan stepped onto the glossy marble floor, he felt tension thick in the air, a palpable sense of dread that seemed to be spreading like wildfire. His heart dropped. That CEO was William Farrow, the man who had mentored him, the architect of his career. Confusion and terror washed over him in waves. Julia was now standing beside him, her expression one of shock. She exclaimed, her voice shaky. Ethan felt like the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Memories flooded into his mind, the late nights spent brainstorming, the trust he had built over months, the faith William had instilled in him. "No, this can't be true," he muttered, denying the very reality playing out before him. A nearby group of employees gathered closer to the TV, whispering, speculating. "I can't believe it," one man said. Another chimed in, "There must be a mistake." Ethan felt a surge of anger amidst the confusion. William was an exceptional leader, a man of integrity, or at least that's what he had always believed. Now it felt like a cruel joke, the world he knew collapsing into utter chaos. Suddenly Sarah, his colleague, rushed over, her face pale. "Ethan, you saw the news, right?" He nodded, trying to keep the words from tripping over one another. "I can't wrap my head around it. He's always been honest." "I don't know," she replied, voice trembling. The familiar thrill from the elevator ride faded as uncertainty surged within him. How could a day that started so ordinarily spiral into such turmoil? "Let's find out what's really happening," Julia said, her tone suddenly determined. "We can't just stand here." Ethan took a deep breath, hearing the strength in her voice. "Yeah, you're right." They hurried through the chaos, weaving around clusters of worried colleagues. Each passing moment felt like they were walking deeper into a storm. The elevator ride to the HR office was filled with an uncomfortable silence, tension clinging to their shoulders like a heavy blanket. When they reached HR, the tight-lipped manager, Carla, was seated at her desk, eyes glued to her screen. She looked up at them, concern etched on her features. She asked, trying to maintain a calm facade. "We need to know what's going on," Julia pressed, urgency spilling from her words. "The news can't be true, right?" Carla hesitated, glancing at the screen before meeting their gazes. "I wish I had good news. All I can say is that the board is meeting soon to discuss the allegations." Ethan felt his frustration bubbling over. Supporting each other, Carla's expression softened. "I know it's tough, but if we panic, we lose control." "Anything? Like what?" Ethan shot back, the fear rising in his throat. As she opened her mouth to respond, Julia interrupted. "There has to be something we can do." Carla sighed, looking conflicted, but nodded. "Keep each other informed, create a network." Feeling disheartened, they left HR and wandered back to the break room, the once cozy atmosphere now stifled by anxiety. They could hear the news rattling on the television, punctuated by incredible accusations. "Ethan," Julia said, breaking the silence. "It's hard to believe he could do something like this," he replied, the words barely leaving his mouth. Julia frowned, her gaze focused and determined. "What if it was all a misunderstanding? We need to dig deeper." "Talk to people," he asked, the uncertainty creeping back in. "We should start with the people who work closest with him," she suggested. His heart pulsed with a new sense of purpose. Perhaps uncovering the truth was the best way to face the chaos. "Okay, let's do it," he said, nodding firmly. They launched into action, moving from desk to desk, interviewing colleagues, gathering insights. With each conversation, fragments of a bigger picture began to emerge, but every piece of information seemed more devastating than the last. "I can't believe he'd go this far," one colleague said, shaking his head. Another shared a related incident. "He turned down a big bribe last year. We all cheered him on for it." Ethan felt his heart sink deeper into despair as everyone spoke. Was it possible William wasn't the man he thought he was? Rumors continued to swirl, each one like a stone sinking into a still lake, rippling outward. Finally, Ethan and Julia retreated to a quiet corner to regroup. He felt weighed down by the burden of uncertainty. He whispered, feeling the click of fear in his throat. "That's a risk we have to take," she replied. "We owe it to ourselves to find out what really happened." The board meeting was set to start in 30 minutes. Ethan felt the urgency wrapping itself around him like a cloak. They quickly alerted their fellow colleagues, gathering a group determined to seek answers. As they entered the meeting room, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. The tension was electric. Everyone exchanged glances filled with equal parts of hope and dread. When William stood before them, he appeared composed, yet there was something underlying in his stance that made Ethan's stomach churn. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," William began, his voice steady yet strained. The murmurs of dissent spread through the room like wildfire. "We're worried, William," someone shouted. He held up his hand for silence. "I understand your concerns, but I assure you that the allegations are baseless." Ethan felt his heart pounding against his ribs. Could he really be telling the truth? But he started, but Julia squeezed his arm, urging him to hold back. William continued, "I'm working closely with the board to resolve this matter." A voice from the back pierced through the tension. As the tensions festered, Ethan met William's gaze, wrestling with his doubts. There was an intensity in those eyes, a flicker of something vulnerable, something human. As even more questions arose, William's poise began to falter, revealing glimpses of the man behind the professional facade. "This is a dark time, and I've spent years building this company." A wave of compassion washed over Ethan as he watched the man he once idolized shake. An internal struggle began to brew within him. Did he believe the man he had once seen as a mentor could actually be guilty? The conversations swirled in the air, bouncing off the walls, threatening to engulf them. Ethan listened, finally realizing something profound. Trust was a fragile thread, but just as the tension seemed to reach its breaking point, William stepped forward, his voice shaking. I know stories can twist narratives, but I won't back down from this fight, not for myself or for you. The room hung in silence, contemplative. Could they really unite behind him despite their doubts? Ethan felt his heart race again, conflicting emotions warring within him. Was it loyalty, fear, or simply a desire to believe in the good that drove him forward? He glanced at Julia and saw determination mirrored in her eyes. Let's stand with him, she whispered, nudging him. The air felt charged as he nodded, a rush of clarity washing over him. Yes, he spoke up. We'll support you, William, Ethan declared, the words slipping past his lips. But please, we need transparency. Several colleagues echoed his sentiment, forming a united front. William looked surprised but grateful, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you, he replied, his relief evident. As uncertain as the future felt, a newfound bond seemed to forge within the room, a fragmented family determined to support one another against the odds. In those moments, everything felt interconnected, their fates intertwined, a tapestry woven from trust and shared struggle. Standing there facing the unknown, Ethan realized that true strength comes from uniting with others in times of chaos. From that day forward, they all embarked on a journey together, facing the storm head-on, determined to uncover the truth and to ensure that one man's fate would not define them all. Because whether they succeeded or faltered, they'd do so as a family, as colleagues, with resilience driving them forward. As Ethan walked out of that meeting, he felt a spark of hope ignite within him. The path ahead remained treacherous, but united they could weather it together. The elevator doors began to slide shut, and Ethan felt a jolt of panic. He could see a woman running toward him, her high heels clicking urgently against the marble floor. Without thinking, he slammed his finger against the button, holding the door open for her. She gasped, sliding in just before the doors closed. Ethan smiled, feeling a brief burst of warmth from the small act of kindness. The awkwardness of morning routine seemed to fade, and for a moment, all that existed was the two of them in the confined space of the elevator. He asked, trying to break the ice as the elevator began its ascent. She replied with a slight laugh, brushing a loose strand of hair back. The elevator dinged at each passing floor, the rhythmic sound almost calming, until her phone buzzed violently in her pocket. She pulled it out, her expression shifting from amusement to horror in seconds. Ethan, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. His heart began to race. She turned the screen toward him, her hands shaking. Each word hit Ethan like a punch. He felt as if the ground had fallen out from under him. William Farrow was not just a CEO to Ethan, he was a mentor, a guide, the man who had helped shape his career. No, he said, denial clawing at him. The elevator dinged and they stepped into the lobby, but Ethan couldn't focus on the bustling people around him. All he could see was the glowing TV screen in the corner, broadcasting the report live. Someone shouted from the crowd gathered near the screen. Voices rose in panic, questions swirling through the air. What does this mean for us? Julia, the woman from the elevator, turned to him, desperation in her eyes. I need to find out more, he said, the urgency gripping him. Ethan glanced around at his colleagues, their faces twisted with confusion and fear. This morning was supposed to be just like any other, but now it felt like they were standing on the edge of a cliff. As early morning conversations swirled around him, Ethan fought to steady his thoughts. We need to get to HR, he said, his voice firm. Together, they pushed toward the office where the tension was palpable. Everyone seemed glued to their phones, sharing updates faster than they could process. As they entered the HR office, Carla, the HR manager, was frantically typing, glancing nervously at the screen. Ethan, Julia, she greeted, but her voice was strained. I'm trying to get more information. He could see worry etched on her face. He implored, desperation creeping in. Right now we need to stay calm, stay informed. That's all I can promise, Carla replied, looking between them. Ethan felt frustration bubbling inside him. Calm. We're in crisis mode, she said, holding up her hands. We need to support each other. But Ethan's mind raced. Support? What kind of support could they offer when everything felt so uncertain? William was the backbone of their office. They relied on him. Julia stepped forward, gripping Ethan's arm. We can't just sit and wait. We need to dig deeper. The urgency in her voice ignited a fire within him. They left HR with a newfound sense of purpose and began to chat with colleagues, gathering snippets of information like puzzle pieces. With every conversation, things grew more complex. Some believed William would be vindicated, others whispered of firings and restructuring. I always saw him as a man of principle, one colleague said, shaking her head. I don't know, another replied, his voice dropping to a whisper, but if he did what they're saying. What does that mean for us? Ethan felt a knot tightening in his stomach. With every new piece of information, the walls felt like they were closing in. He had trusted William so implicitly. How could this happen? Let's go back to the break room, Julia suggested as they wandered the office, her voice laden with determination. We need a strategy. They found a quiet corner in the break room, the small TV still broadcasting coverage of the breaking news. Ethan felt the tension rise in his chest as William's face appeared on the screen, resolute yet weary. "I am innocent," William asserted, his voice echoing through the lobby. Ethan leaned forward, caught between disbelief and a flicker of hope. Julia whispered, glancing at him. But doubt hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ethan's phone buzzed suddenly. It was a message from Sarah, a colleague he saw as a friend. "Ethan, we're meeting in the conference room to discuss the situation." "Let's go," he said to Julia, the urgency propelling him forward. As they walked, his heart pounded against his chest, nerves raking him raw. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Employees filled the space, their faces were tight with anxiety. As Ethan and Julia entered, the chatter hushed, all eyes turning to them. "We need to act fast," Sarah began, her tone grave. "The longer we wait, the less control we have." "Exactly," Julia added, stepping up. "We need to get the truth, but how?" Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "What if we go to the board directly? We demand transparency." The room buzzed with buzzing murmurs of approval. The idea seemed to ignite something, a fire starting to spread, but before any decisions were made, someone shouted from the back, "But what if we're wrong?" Ethan's heart sank as doubts crept back in. Their loyalty was being tested. "We owe it to ourselves to dig deeper." "If we're going to stand by William, we need to be sure," he argued, his voice growing more confident. They agreed to take action, mobilizing into groups to start gathering evidence, talking to anyone who might have insight. The mission gave them strength and purpose, a way to push back against the tide of uncertainty. As the day dragged on, Ethan felt like he was trapped in a whirlwind. Each conversation, each piece of information pulled him deeper into a labyrinth of doubt. With every passing hour, he was increasingly haunted by the reality that the man he respected could be steeped in darkness. Julia remained by his side, encouraging him every step of the way. "We're not alone in this. You've got to trust the people who care about you," she would say, her reassuring words fighting back against his pain. Finally, they decided to take a break, retreating to a quiet balcony that overlooked the city. The sight of the bustling streets below contrasted starkly with the turmoil inside him. Julia asked, leaning against the railing. Ethan took a deep breath, gazing at the horizon. "Because he's always encouraged me to be better. He's taught me the value of integrity in every decision." She pressed gently. "Then we'll uncover the truth together," he replied, conviction strong in his voice. As the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting the city in golden hues, they turned back toward the office. There was still work to do, still answers to uncover. Returning inside, the atmosphere remained thick with anxiety. Conversations felt charged with the need for hope. Then Sarah burst into the office, excitement lighting up her eyes. "Ethan, Julia," she exclaimed, pulling them toward her desk. A new article had just gone live detailing a counter-allegation. She breathed, "Listen to this. It's being investigated by the authorities." For a moment, Ethan felt a rush of relief. He asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "If the allegations are false, this changes everything," Julia said, her eyes twinkling with cautious optimism. But they couldn't let themselves get carried away on a wave of hope. "This still doesn't explain everything," Ethan reminded them. "We need to wait for more information." Hours passed, tension building as everyone anxiously awaited news, each ping of their phones sending their hearts racing. Ethan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Finally, the message everyone had been waiting for arrived. The clock ticked down slowly. As the time approached, Ethan's stomach twisted nervously. This was it, everything was about to change. As employees filed into the conference room, settling into their seats, he felt every heartbeat echoing in his chest. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation. William appeared before them, visibly worn but determined. "Thank you for your patience. I know this has been a tumultuous time," he began, his voice steady. Whispers broke out across the room, doubt and hope intertwined. "I have nothing to hide," William continued, his demeanor strong. "These accusations are driven by jealousy, a smear intended to undermine the good work we've built here." Ethan felt something shift within the crowd. The tension morphed into curiosity and cautious hope. "While we navigate this challenging road ahead, I ask for your support," William said, meeting their gazes. As silence enveloped the room, Ethan felt the weight lift from his chest. Perhaps it was time to renew their faith. Maybe all the doubts could transform into determination. The meeting ended with an air of resilience. Employees looked at each other, faces shifting from uncertainty to hope. Ethan felt the collective strength building, a shared belief igniting within them. As he stepped out of the conference room, he couldn't help but steal a glance at Julia. She smiled back at him, a flicker of understanding passing between them. They were in this together, grappling with the complexities of trust and survival. The journey ahead may still be uncertain, but now they knew they wouldn't face it alone. With every challenge, they would unite. With every question, they would search for answers. Maybe, just maybe, it was in those chaotic moments that the strongest bonds were forged. Together, they were ready to confront whatever came next, confident in their own truths, rooted in each other. The elevator doors started to close when Ethan spotted a frantic woman rushing toward him. In a split second, he pressed the button to hold the door, feeling an odd sense of heroism. She stepped inside, breathless and grateful, offering him a quick smile as the doors slid shut. Thanks, she said, still catching her breath. No problem, Ethan replied, enjoying the warmth of their brief connection. The elevator began its ascent, the familiar hum of machinery surrounding them. He turned to ask her about her day, but before he could speak, her phone buzzed sharply, pulling her attention like a magnet. Wait, she said, her expression dripping with disbelief as she read the screen. Ethan asked, leaning closer, curiosity overtaking him. It's about. He turned the screen toward him, her hands shaking slightly. He squinted at the glowing display. Time seemed to stop. Ethan felt as though the air had been sucked out of the elevator. He exclaimed, heart racing. The woman's wide eyes mirrored his shock. Ethan, this is serious. Ethan's mind reeled. William Farrow was more than just a CEO to him. He was a mentor, someone Ethan had trusted completely. Memories cascaded through his mind, late nights at the office, brainstorming sessions filled with laughter. How could he be involved in something so dark? The elevator dinged as it reached the lobby, and as the doors opened, they were greeted by a whirlwind of noise and confusion. A crowd had formed around the large TV mounted on the wall, where reporters spewed the latest updates like a fire hose. Ethan stepped into that chaos, adrenaline surging. I need to find out more, he murmured, scanning the room for familiar faces. Voices clamored around him, each more frantic than the last. His colleagues were engaged in hushed conversations laced with fear. One man shouted. A knot tightened in Ethan's stomach. Thoughts raced through his mind. If William fell, would the company go with him? Would his job evaporate into thin air? A voice pierced through the din. It was Sarah, his coworker and friend, running toward him, her face flushed with anxiety. Did you read the article? Not yet, he replied, feeling the gravity of the situation pulling him under. But it's bad, Sarah. She asked, fear flickering in her eyes. I don't know, he said, but doubt began to gnaw at him. The man he had placed on a pedestal for so long was suddenly shrouded in shadow. As more people gathered around the TV, Ethan felt a reassuring hand on his shoulder. It was Julia, the woman from the elevator, now by his side again. She asked, eyes wide with concern. We need information, Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. He glanced at the ever-increasing crowd of concerned colleagues. We should check in with HR. They made their way to the HR department, each step feeling heavier, the tension in the air palpable. As they entered, Carla, the HR manager, was scrambling at her desk, frantically typing emails, glancing up at the TV screen every few seconds. She asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Ethan nodded, the reality crashing down on him. What's going to happen? Carla's fingers paused over the keyboard and she looked at them, her expression somber. Right now, we need to keep communication open to support each other. Support, the word felt inadequate. Ethan struggled to breathe. They were all on a sinking ship, and all he could think about was who would be left when the dust settled. Julia stepped forward, her resolve firm. We can't just wait and see what happens. We need to find the truth quickly. Carla nodded slowly. You may have a point, but be cautious. That was it. Ethan felt a surge of determination, a flicker of hope piercing through the fog of uncertainty. Let's do it, he said, looking at Julia and the group forming around them. They left the HR office, prepared to uncover whatever they could. Colleagues offered snippets of information, some sympathetic, others doubtful. He's always been so straight with us, one colleague said, shaking his head. Maybe it's a mistake, another added, uncertainty lacing their voice. Ethan felt the tension in his chest tighten. The more they talked, the more variables sprang up. There were whispers of jealousy, stories of competition from rival companies. Each rumor flared hope and dread in his gut. Finally, they returned to the break room to regroup. The small television mounted on the wall caught Ethan's eye again, its headlines flashing, pointing toward chaos. Look, Julia said, watching intently as the screen displayed clips of William undeniably shaken. But as Ethan watched William struggle to maintain poise, doubt crept into his mind. Ethan muttered, fighting against the growing anxiety. Maybe it's a smear campaign, Julia suggested, her brow furrowing. Or maybe he's not who we think he is, Ethan said, the words slipping out without his consent. Julia's gaze turned fierce. Their collective resolve crystallized into something stronger. They formed a plan, gathering notes, drafting emails, preparing to confront uncertainty head-on. Suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was a notification from Sarah, meeting in the conference room. The urgency propelled them forward. As they raced to the conference room, Ethan's heart pounded, tension building in the air. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. As employees packed the room, Ethan could sense the whirlwind of emotions swirling: fear, hope, uncertainty. At the front of the room, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. I know we're all scared right now, but we can't allow ourselves to be paralyzed. Ethan could see everyone nodding in silent agreement, determination breaking through the underlying panic. Stakes were high, and suddenly the fight was no longer just for William, it was for their own futures, their careers, and their livelihood. We can't just rely on the news, we need facts, Ethan stated, rising from his seat. The murmurs swelled around the room as various voices offered suggestions, reaching out to contacts, gathering evidence. The question hung in the air, heavy like a stone. Ethan's throat tightened as doubt seeped into the room once more. But then Julia stood up, her voice filled with conviction. We don't know yet, but we're a team. We can support him while uncovering the facts. The energy shifted, determination replacing the shadow of fear. They decided to gather information from every corner to track down anyone who might have insight into the situation. Hours passed, each ticking minute filled with anticipation and the constant tension mixed with the echoes of speculation. Just when it felt like they were from sinking into despair, a new wave of urgency washed over the office. Guys. Sarah burst in again, breathless. They just released a new statement. Ethan's heart raced. Could this really change everything? Sarah pointed to her screen. They're launching a full internal investigation, and meanwhile, William is going to remain at the helm. The words filled him with a mix of hope and doubt. He murmured, glancing around at his colleagues. Julia stood next to him, her expression resolute. We need to believe in the man we've respected for so long. As the sun began to dip below the skyline, the mood in the office shifted. Conversations turned from whispers of fear to discussions of support and resilience. Could they rally around William? It started to feel possible. They organized meetings, deciding to draft a letter to the board, voicing their united front. The action felt empowering, a way to channel the fear into something constructive. As the evening wore on, the feeling of solidarity grew. They wrote, edited, and collaborated, a shared mission pulsing through them. As they finalized their letter, Ethan took a step back for a moment, looking around at the faces of his colleagues, determined, hopeful, resolute. Together, they could face whatever storm came their way. After sending off the letter, they awaited responses, tension hanging in the air. As night crept in, they began to receive updates. Hey, they're calling a meeting with the board tomorrow morning, Sarah said with excitement. They want our input. As the news broke like a wave through the room, a sense of hope ignited once again. It wasn't just about the CEO anymore, it was about the power of collaboration, the strength they found collectively. Let's rally together, Ethan suggested, his voice rising with enthusiasm. And as they prepared for the next day, a deep sense of purpose began to wash over him. They weren't just employees anymore, they were a team, a family fighting for their future. The next morning was charged with expectation. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that today would change everything. As they gathered in the conference room, the air crackled with energy. When the board members arrived, they stepped forward, faces a mixture of seriousness and determination. Thank you all for being here, the lead board member said. We understand the turmoil this situation has caused. As the discussion began, Ethan listened intently, thoughts swirling. Finally, Sarah spoke up, echoing their letter, urging transparency and emphasizing the importance of employee morale. More voices joined in, sharing thoughts and experiences, the conversation growing more intense. The board members listened, their expressions hard to read. But Ethan could feel the shift. They were no longer onlookers in their lives. After an in-depth dialogue, the board made a moving announcement. We are committed to investigating these allegations thoroughly. As he left the meeting, Ethan felt a mix of relief and hope flooding through him. They were shaping their own destiny. Outside, Julia turned to him, eyes ablaze with determination. We did it, she said. They had faced uncertainty, fear, and doubt, but through it all, they discovered a powerful truth. They were not alone in this fight. United, they had weathered the storm, their voices ringing loud and clear. Ethan realized that the challenges ahead would still test them, but now they faced those challenges with courage and confidence. They had not only fought for their CEO, but for each other. In a world filled with chaos and uncertainty, maybe sometimes the strongest actions come from simply holding the door open for one another. And as they walked toward the future, he knew they would continue to do just that. Ethan pressed the button for the lobby, feeling the vibrations of the elevator beneath his feet. As the doors began to close, he noticed a woman sprinting toward him, her hair trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Without thinking, he hit the open button, holding the door for her. She gasped, stepping inside just before the door slid shut. No problem, he replied, giving her a smile as the elevator hummed softly. It felt good to be polite, to help someone out in the hurried pace of city life. The elevator began its descent, but as they moved down, she pulled out her phone, her brows furrowing. A moment later, her expression twisted from focused to alarmed. Ethan asked, curiosity overpowering his instinct to respect her space. Her voice trembled as she held the screen closer. It's about. His pulse quickened. She read the headline aloud, her voice thick with disbelief. Time froze. Ethan's heart dropped into his stomach. William Farrow, the man who had mentored him, the visionary behind the company, was being accused of something unimaginable. No, he breathed, shaking his head slowly. The elevator doors dinged as they reached the lobby. The moment they opened, they were met by a chaotic scene. People crowded around the large screen mounted on the wall, voices rising in a mix of shock and outrage. Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped out and felt her presence close beside him, a supportive stranger navigating through the tumultuous emotions boiling around them. We need to find out what's happening, she urged, the intensity in her eyes reflecting his own rising panic. He nodded, squeezing past clusters of nervous employees, their faces etched with disbelief. Let's head to HR, he suggested, searching for a source of clarity amid the chaos. As they made their way to the HR office, Ethan felt a combination of dread and anger boiling up inside him. William had always been honest, had taught Ethan the importance of integrity in business. How could he be mixed up in something so vile? Reaching the HR office, Carla, the HR manager, was typing furiously at her desk, desperation flickering in her eyes as she glanced up at the TV screen. Carla asked, her voice tight with concern. "I just found out," Ethan replied, his tone steady despite the turmoil in his heart. Carla sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "All we can do right now is wait for the board meeting." Julia, the woman from the elevator, interjected. "We can't just sit and wait. People are already talking. This could ruin lives," Carla replied, her voice dipping with worry. Ethan could sense the rising tide of hopelessness around them, a suffocating weight threatening to swallow him whole. "Let's talk to other employees," he finally said, determination replacing uncertainty. As they left the office, the chatter around the lobby grew ever more frenzied. Employees whispered in clusters, eyes wide. The gravity of the accusations pressed down on them. Ethan felt like he was stepping through a surreal nightmare, one that he could not wake up from. When they finally reached a small group gathered near the break room, Ethan cleared his throat. "Everyone's scared," one colleague said, his voice low. "Some people think he might have done something, but I can't believe that. He's always been so." "Yeah, same here," another replied. Ethan could feel the swirling confusion and uncertainty wrap around them like thick fog. "We need to know for sure. If he's innocent, we need to support him." Julia asked, her voice tense. The question hung heavily in the air. Abandoning their mentor felt like a betrayal, yet blindly standing by him could lead to disaster. With a heaviness in his heart, Ethan looked around at his colleagues' faces, mirroring his own dread. "We can't wait for someone else to tell us the truth." They started gathering information, spreading out across the office, speaking to anyone who might know something. Each conversation felt like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle, but every fragment brought new confusion rather than clarity. As the sun began to dip outside, casting long shadows through the glass facade of the building, Ethan and Julia found a quiet corner to regroup. She looked at him, concern etched on her face. Julia asked. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration boiling within him. "I don't want to believe he's guilty, but what if he is?" Julia leaned closer, her voice soothing. "We have to trust what we know, what he's taught us." Fueled by their determination, they returned to the gathering storm of conversations. Each moment felt like stepping onto thin ice, dangerous and unpredictable. A voice called out, drawing Ethan's attention. It was Sarah, her face lighting up with urgency. "You won't believe this," Ethan asked, stepping closer. "They're saying they're inflating the narrative. They suspect someone has an agenda against William." Hope flared in Ethan's chest. "Maybe," Sarah said, glancing around nervously, "but we can't get complacent." Taking a deep breath, he felt the atmosphere shift slightly. Suddenly, they were no longer just passive observers. They were in this together, a team battling uncertainty. They organized a meeting, focusing on cultivating unity among employees in the wake of the crisis. The power of collective strength felt invigorating. As they drafted a message to the board expressing their concerns, Ethan could sense the transformative effects of collaboration. Hours melted into a blur of discussion, and excitement replaced apprehension as they took concrete steps. With each passing moment, the sense of hope grew more tangible, but in a heartbeat, the air shifted again. "Everyone, gather around," Sarah called. Ethan's heart raced as they squeezed into the small conference room. He locked eyes with Julia, her expression one of fierce determination. As the board members came in, the atmosphere was electric. The room buzzed with a cocktail of apprehension and anticipation. "Thank you for being here on such short notice," the head of the board began, his voice steady yet somber. "We understand these accusations are impacting all of you." Whispers erupted among employees, some exchanging nervous glances. William's fate felt tied to them, a shared burden. After what felt like an eternity, the head of the board continued. "As of right now, there is no evidence of wrongdoing. However, we will proceed with a full investigation." Ethan felt the weight lift slightly, yet uncertainty still loomed heavily. Someone questioned from the back. "It means that we as a team must come together to support the values of this company," the board member replied, his gaze sweeping across the room. As they exited the meeting, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose igniting within him. They weren't just employees anymore, they were stakeholders in a battle for integrity. Julia turned to him, a spark in her eyes. "We're going to ride this wave together. We can't let fear paralyze us." And in that moment, Ethan realized how powerful loyalty could be, how it could drive people to stand together even in the toughest times. Reaching out to his colleagues, he felt humanity resurface in a profound way. Over the next few days, the investigation raged on and the headlines continued to swirl. The workplace buzzed with speculation, but they took it upon themselves to remain strong, supporting one another through the uncertainty. Every time the TV flickered with updates, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. The story was evolving. A new scandal emerged, this one involving a competing firm with a history of deceit. Then, just as the tension reached a peak, breaking news flashed across their screens. Ethan felt a sense of relief wash over him like cool rain on a sweltering day. "Maybe this really is a smear campaign," he whispered to Julia, hope rekindling. Their fight grew even fiercer. They had a cause, now a mission to uphold the integrity of their company and the man they admired. As morale surged, they took steps to organize collective support for William, rallying their fellow employees to stand united. In the days that followed, the outcry from the employees reached new heights. They penned letters, gathered signatures, and presented a united front to the board. They were battling a narrative that threatened to erase everything they stood for. As the day of the next board meeting approached, Ethan gripped a stack of letters, determination blazing in his heart. With Julia beside him, he led the charge, advocating for clarity and truth. When they finally stepped into the boardroom, it was bustling with tension. Employees filled the seats, their resolute expressions signaling solidarity. As the meeting convened, Ethan felt a rush of empowerment. Together, they shared their fears, their hopes, a plea for truth that echoed through the air, each voice rising one after the other, transforming fear into determination. After the discussions concluded, the head of the board looked at them thoughtfully. "We hear you. Your loyalty to this company does not go unnoticed." In that moment, they realized that they were not alone. They were stronger together, a force to be reckoned with. As they stepped out of the boardroom, Ethan felt a sense of closure wash over him. Though uncertainty still loomed, they had taken responsibility for their future. When all was said and done, it wasn't just about William anymore. It was about fidelity, integrity, and belief, a testament to the power of standing up for one another. He looked around at his colleagues, at Julia, knowing that this was only the beginning of their journey together. In a world where trust can quickly erode, they had chosen to forge a path of loyalty, emerging from the shadows stronger than ever. And as Ethan walked toward the future, he felt forged anew, ready to face whatever came next with a united spirit. In the end, it was about being there for one another in the elevator of life, and as they moved upward together, he knew they could weather any storm. The elevator doors began to slide closed, and Ethan felt a jolt of panic. He was standing inside, waiting for the lobby, when he saw her woman running towards him, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Without thinking, he pressed the button to hold the doors open. She gasped, stepping in just before the doors slid shut. Ethan offered her a quick smile. "No problem," he said, feeling a rush of goodwill. As the elevator hummed softly, he glanced at the digital display. Just another ordinary morning, or so he thought, but then the woman pulled out her phone, her expression shifting from casual to shocked. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice quaking. Ethan asked, uneasy. She turned the screen toward him, and his breath caught. His heart dropped to his stomach. William Farrow, the man who had taken Ethan under his wing since day one, was now being accused of something so serious. "No way," Ethan muttered, disbelief coursing through him. The woman's eyes widened. Before Ethan could respond, the elevator dinged. They stepped into the lobby, where chaos erupted. People were gathered around the large TV mounted on the wall, staring in disbelief as the news played out live. Someone shouted from the crowd. Ethan felt like he had been dropped into a surreal nightmare. He pushed through the throng, fear gnawing at his insides. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How could the man he trusted be caught in such a scandal? A familiar voice broke through the din. It was Sarah, his colleague, rushing toward him, her face pale. "Did you see the news?" "I've seen it," he said, frustration building. "They're saying he could be implicated in serious crimes," she replied, her eyes filled with concern. "No, this doesn't make any sense," Ethan said, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath him. William had always talked about integrity. He had dedicated himself to turning the company into something great. How could that man suddenly be involved in deceit? As the lobby filled with worried murmurs, one question echoed through Ethan's mind. What would happen to all of them if William fell? "Let's head to HR," Sarah suggested, urgency in her voice. Together they pushed through the crowd, each step heavy with uncertainty. The elevator felt like a distant memory, its calming hum replaced by an electric tension. When they reached the HR office, Carla, the HR manager, was on the phone, her voice strained. She glanced up, and her face paled as she saw them. Ethan nodded, he asked, the words catching in his throat. Carla sighed, her expression a mix of anxiety and regret. "Right now we're in crisis mode. I can't promise anything." Support, the word felt hollow against the backdrop of rising panic swirling around them. Ethan felt his chest tight. "We need to know more." Julia, the woman from the elevator, appeared beside them. "I can help gather information," she said, fiery determination lighting her eyes. Ethan nodded, grateful for her drive. "Let's talk to other employees." They left HR and moved through the office, speaking to colleagues in hushed tones. Each conversation felt like striking a match in a dark room. The shadows of speculation and fear loomed larger with every rumor they gathered. "I always thought he was a good guy," one employee said, shaking his head. "Maybe it's all just slander," another chimed in. Ethan could feel uncertainty weighing him down. The more they talked, the more fragmented the pieces became. "Look, let's get together and organize what we've learned," Sarah suggested. "We can't let rumors pull us apart." In the break room, they huddled around a table, eyes darting to the TV, where breaking news flagged across the screen. "They say he's denying everything," Julia reported, glancing at the screen. Ethan felt a pang of confusion, disbelief mingled with anger. How had everything unraveled so quickly? We need to keep an open mind, he said. The room quieted, a mix of hope and dread permeating the air. Each person felt the weight of the situation. They gathered their notes, drafting a plan, preparing for whatever came next. With every hour that passed, Ethan felt the tension tighten. The world outside felt remote and disconnected from their internal storm. Suddenly, Sarah burst in. They just announced an emergency board meeting. Everyone's required to attend, she said, her eyes sparkling with urgency. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline wash over him. Let's go, he urged, pushing through the door behind her. Inside the crowded boardroom, the atmosphere hummed with energy. Employees crowded together, whispering heatedly. There was a collective concern, a palpable anxiety filling the room. William stepped forward, his face etched with determination, though it was evident he was deeply affected. Thank you all for coming. I know these past few days have been difficult. Ethan held his breath as William continued. I will not deny that there are allegations against me, but I swear to you they are unfounded. The sound of murmurs filled the room, some voices sharp with disbelief, others softer, more supportive. Ethan could feel a storm brewing inside him. A wave of unease washed over Ethan. It felt like a moment that could tip the scales. He assessed the faces around him, some bearing skepticism, others showing concern. Trust is built through action, William replied, his voice steady. The tension in the room thickened. Julia pleaded, her voice punctuating the silence. William met her gaze head-on, strength radiating from him. We support each other. If there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's the power of teamwork. Ethan felt an unexpected surge of solidarity in those words. It wasn't just about William, it was about all of them fighting through uncertainty together. With newfound determination, Ethan stood up. If you're innocent, he declared, we'll stand by you. Silence stretched, and then the room erupted in murmurs of agreement. People nodded, eyes lighting up. I'll help any way I can, Sarah chimed in, her voice rising above the crowd. As they gathered under the banner of unity, Ethan felt the energy shift in the room. Each person was a part of something bigger than themselves, a team willing to fight for truth, for their livelihoods, and for their future. After the meeting, waves of determination coursed through the office. They formed action committees, reaching out to build connections, gathering support from those willing to stand firm. Ethan felt invigorated. But just as hope surged, the tide shifted yet again. Ethan, someone called from the back. It was Liam, another colleague, rushing toward them, his face flushed with a mix of excitement and concern. Julia asked, dread creeping back in. It's an expose on the allegations. Ethan felt adrenaline surge through him again. This was it, the news they had been waiting for, a chance to set the record straight. We need to find out everything about this, Ethan urged. Over the next hours, the atmosphere in the office buzzed with energy and anticipation. They shared snippets of information, piecing together their thoughts and findings, readying themselves for the fallout. Suddenly, a message popped up in Ethan's inbox. His heart raced. They were about to dive deep into the storm. When they gathered in the conference room, Ethan could feel the anticipation in the air, hushed whispers bouncing around like charged particles. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Carla began, her tone serious. We're aware of the hotbed of controversy surrounding our CEO. Ethan leaned in, holding his breath. Every eye in the room was glued to her. The investigation is underway, and we're taking the necessary steps to ensure transparency. Someone chimed in. We need to show strength, Carla continued. The energy in the room shifted. People nodded, determination replacing the weariness. This was their fight too, a journey to reclaim their narrative. Ethan felt his resolve solidifying. Let's draft that statement together. With each voice added, every detail emphasized, the support felt tangible. They were uniting against a common foe, fear and uncertainty. By the time they finished drafting the statement, Ethan felt a sense of pride swell within him. This was more than just corporate loyalty, it was about standing up for what was right. As the days passed, news broke that the investigation had gathered steam, revealing unsettling links to rival companies with questionable tactics. The tide was turning, and their support was instrumental in pushing against the narrative that had once felt insurmountable. Finally, the day came when the board announced a press conference, ready to lay out the facts, respond to inquiries, and finally address the public. Ethan joined his colleagues, senses heightened, waiting expectantly. The press room was filled with reporters anxiously shuffling papers. Cameras clicked and microphones jostled for attention. As William stepped up to the podium, Ethan felt a rush of emotion. This was the man he had admired. This was the moment they had all been fighting for. Thank you for being here, William began, his voice steady, revealing a resolve that resonated deeply. I stand before you today, not just as your CEO, but as a man committed to the truth. A wave of relief washed over Ethan, but William wasn't done. I want to thank the employees of Arcadia Enterprises for their unwavering support during this harrowing time. Cheers erupted in the room, the tension breaking as everyone lifted their voices in unison. Ethan turned to Julia, who had tears in her eyes. We did it, she whispered, embracing him tightly. This wasn't just about one man, it was about the collective strength he had forged with his colleagues, the unity that transformed fear into determination. The power of standing together had given them all a voice, a chance to reclaim what it meant to trust and support one another. As they moved into the future, Ethan felt optimistic. They had faced chaos head-on, and together they emerged stronger, unbroken, an unyielding force ready for whatever lay ahead. And as they stepped back into the world, he knew that sometimes all it took to ignite that kind of courage was a simple act of holding the elevator door open. The elevator doors began to close, and Ethan saw her sprinting toward him, her heels clicking against the sleek marble floor. Without thinking, he pressed the button to hold the door open, allowing her to slip inside just in time. She gasped, brushing a few errant strands of hair from her face as the doors slid shut. Breath came out in small puffs, a mix of relief and gratitude etched on her features. "No problem," he replied, flashing a polite smile. The ordinary moment was a brief connection in the busy routine of city life. As the elevator started its ascent, Ethan turned to offer some light conversation. "Always," she replied with a small laugh. Just then her phone buzzed violently in her pocket, interrupting their exchange. She fished it out, her face transforming from casual warmth to a look of horror. He asked, his curiosity piqued and worry settling in his chest. The words struck Ethan like a lightning bolt, his heart racing in disbelief. William Farrow, the man who had given him opportunities and mentored him since he first walked through the company doors, was being accused of something so drastic. "No way," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. The elevator dinged as they reached the lobby, but Ethan felt as if he were moving in slow motion. As the doors opened, chaos erupted in the vast space. A throng of employees surrounded the large television mounted on the wall, voices rising in a frenzy of shock and speculation. Ethan stepped out, his instincts telling him this was more than just a rumor. He had to know the truth. "I need to find out what's going on," he said, determination washing over him like a wave. They made their way through the crowd, panic palpable in the air. The woman asked, her voice a mix of concern and fear. "Let's head to HR," Ethan urged, pushing forward, battling the rising tide of anxiety. As they reached the HR office, Carla, the HR manager, was seated at her desk, frantically typing emails. Her eyes darted to the TV, then back to the computer screen. Asked, looking up as they entered. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil. Carla pinched the bridge of her nose, exhaling deeply. "I can't say right now. The board is meeting to discuss the situation, but I need everyone to remain calm and focused." Ethan felt a mix of frustration and confusion. "We need clarity. What if everything goes south?" The woman chimed in, her voice trembling slightly. Carla hesitated but finally replied, "I can't confirm or deny anything." That word support felt inadequate to Ethan. The idea of banding together was comforting, but they were also facing the unknown, and the shadows of doubt loomed larger. All at once, strength swelled within him. "We have to find out what's really happening," he said. Julia, as he learned her name was, nodded in agreement. They left the HR office together, the atmosphere starkly different from the chaos in the lobby. The uncertainty settled around them like a thick fog, making every word feel heavy. As Ethan navigated through the crowd, he could hear snippets of conversation. "I can't believe it could be true," one colleague said anxiously. "William has always been honest with us," another countered, their voice shaky. Sweat formed at Ethan's brow as he wrestled with the storm of uncertainty swirling in his mind. William, a man he respected like a father figure, was now ensnared in a web of scandal. At that moment, he spotted Sarah, another colleague who often shared coffee with him. She rushed over, her face lined with worry. "Ethan, did you hear about the allegations?" "I don't want to believe it," Ethan replied, his heart racing. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Sarah urged. Ethan felt the knot in his stomach tight. "Let's gather information." As they moved from desk to desk, discussions grew passionate. Conversations turned into debates, fears taking root. Each voice painted a different picture, yet common threads of concern wove through them all. "I heard a rumor it might not be true," one colleague said, glancing around nervously. Another responded, doubt creeping in. Ethan clenched his jaw, a mix of anger and fear fueling him. How had everything unraveled so quickly? After collecting bits of information for what felt like hours, they retreated to the break room, a small haven amidst the chaos. Eyes darted to the TV mounted on the wall. "This can't be happening," Julia murmured, her brows knitted in concern. "We need to find someone who can help us navigate this," Ethan insisted, determination filling his words. Sarah nodded. "Let's hold a meeting." The wheels began to turn. Organized a group, spreading the word about an upcoming meeting to discuss collective concerns. Ethan felt the tide shifting slightly, a sense of purpose beginning to take root. When the day of the meeting arrived, tension filled the air as employees gathered in the conference room. Faces were tight with anxiety but also determination. They were all in this together. "Thank you for coming," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Ethan looked around at the faces, some showing support, others uncertain. "We can't allow fear to dictate our actions. We have to find the truth and stand together," he said, his heart racing. The conversation swelled, people began sharing their thoughts, their hopes for clarity. Together, they drafted a letter to the board, voicing their support for William while asking for transparency regarding the situation. As they worked together, a sense of camaraderie blossomed. Ethan could feel the tension slowly melting away with each shared concern, every voice lifted in support. They were solidifying their resolve, and he left the meeting with a newfound sense of hope. But the world outside continued to turn, and the next day the news was grimmer than ever. Ethan's stomach twisted as he read the new headlines. Each update felt like a dagger, slashing through the fragile sense of solidarity they had built. Julia asked, her tone straining against the uncertainty lingering in the air. "We keep pushing forward," Ethan said, squeezing her shoulder. "This is bigger than William now, it's about all of us." Days turned into weeks, each headline more disheartening than the last, yet the employees rallied around each other. Rumors began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unity. They continued their meetings, exchanging ideas, strategizing. Suddenly, Ethan received a message alert. "There's a new development," it read. He quickly gathered everyone in the conference room. When they were gathered, he felt a rush of urgency. He exclaimed. Hope flared in the room, but then a new worry emerged. Someone murmured. Another voice added, painting doubt as thick as fog across their optimism. Before Ethan could respond, Sarah stood. "We can't let fear paralyze us. We need to support him, but we have to do it wisely." Ethan felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Voices began to rise, the room filled with speculation, anger clashing with hope. It was suddenly all so overwhelming. Just then, a knock on the door snapped them back to reality. Carla entered, her expression grave. "We have an emergency board meeting. You all need to be there." They followed her into the boardroom, and the air crackled with tension. The board members shuffled papers, their faces pinched with concern as they prepared to address the employees. "Thank you for gathering," the head of the board began. "We have new information regarding the allegations against the CEO." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Whatever was about to be said could change everything. The board member cleared his throat, and tension crackled like electricity in the room. Gasps spread through the room, but this could also mean our CEO was unaware of the actions taken, the board member continued. "We need to prepare for the fallout." Ethan felt a mix of relief and confusion. They might have a shot at avoiding disaster, but at what cost? "The investigation is ongoing," the board member added, "and we encourage you to stay strong and united." As the meeting concluded, a quiet murmur spread through the gathered employees, a bittersweet tension hanging in the air. Ethan and Julia left together, determination mingled with uncertainty. There was so much still at stake, and he could feel the weight pressing on them. They walked to the break room, away from the prying eyes. Julia asked, heart heavy with anxiety, "We have to keep the pressure on." "We've come so far," Ethan replied, feeling both drained and energized. Then, as Jonas, the sharpest employee in HR, walked by, Ethan grabbed his arm. Jonas paused, dark eyes filled with conflict. "I've seen companies collapse over less." Ethan looked at Julia, understanding dawning in her gaze as they both registered the gravity of his words. Could this be where everything changed? Just then, Ethan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Meet me on the rooftop in 30 minutes. His pulse raced again, excitement and dread mingling as he exchanged glances with Julia. She asked, her voice low and serious. "Of course, this could be the break we need," he replied, heart pounding. One last glance at the frenzied office behind them, and then Ethan made his way to the stairs, each step filled with anticipation. Little did he know that the truth he sought was about to reveal far more than he'd ever expected, leaving him standing on the precipice of choices that could change everything. As he reached the rooftop, the weight of impending revelation sat heavy in the air. He took a deep breath, the chill of the evening wind biting at his skin, but it was not the cold that made him shiver. It was the uncertainty of what lay ahead.